Everett Calloway had been away from Red Hollow for nearly 3 weeks, tied up with state duties, and all he wanted was a quiet stretch of days to mend fences, check the reservoir, and breathe for a while. He expected dust, silence, and the familiar curve of the gravel road leading home. Instead, the first thing he saw was a towering sign where no sign had ever stood before, announcing Silver Creek Grand Reserve and promising luxury homes on land that had belonged to his family for generations. His iron gate had been fitted with a new lock. Two black SUVs sat just inside the property line. Suited men were walking investors past the horse barn as though every acre already belonged to them. For a moment he stayed in the truck, engine running, staring at the scene as if it might somehow correct itself. It did not. The lettering on the sign was crisp and new, made for a launch that had been planned for weeks, complete with renderings of villas where his hayfields had always been. Everett used the side gate, walked in, and found Marlene Voss waiting. She wore the same dark pink blazer, white blouse, dark pink skirt, and pearl earrings she always used at HOA meetings, but this time the confidence in her face had hardened into ownership. She treated him like a trespasser on land she believed had already changed hands. Everett looked at the barn, the buyers, the lock, and the sign, and understood the scale of the betrayal in one cold instant. Someone had not just challenged him, someone had prepared to erase him from his own farm. At first, it was only notices about road access, future zoning, and community meetings that assumed the farm would someday become something else. Then came the glossy brochures, the door-knock visits, and the whispers about development money that could help everyone if the land would simply be divided the right way. Marlene had become the face of that pressure. She showed up polished and composed, dark pink jacket bright against the dust, talking as if confidence could turn into authority the moment enough people agreed to nod along. Everett ignored most of it and kept working. He mended fences himself, checked water lines, walked the reservoir, and trusted the old barn and the wide fields to keep holding the truth of what belonged to him. Still, the warning signs kept stacking up. Survey stakes appeared beyond the tree line. Strange trucks rolled past at odd hours. Land maps began circulating among buyers who had never once asked him for permission. Even the mail changed, with notices arriving that treated Red Hollow like a future project instead of a living farm. By the time he came home, the clues were impossible to dismiss. Somebody had not been waiting for a sale. Somebody had been preparing the ground for a theft. At the gate, Marlene moved first, lifting a stack of paperwork as if a binder could replace ownership. The first page claimed Everett had sold the 5,200 acres to Silver Basin Development for $11.8 million. The signature at the bottom looked close enough to fool someone in a hurry, but Everett knew his own hand the way a rancher knows the shape of a fence line after dark. The packet also claimed he had granted power of attorney to a man whose name meant nothing to him. Behind Marlene, the buyers in tailored suits kept glancing at the barn and the sign, trying to decide whether they were witnessing a legitimate transaction or the kind of mistake that could ruin a deal. Security stood near the fence, giving the whole scene an ugly sense of official approval.
Marlene never once treated Everett like the owner. She treated him like an obstacle standing in front of money that had already been promised elsewhere. Everett did not argue. He pulled out his phone, photographed the sign, the trucks, the buyers, the papers, and Marlene herself. Then he checked the transfer date listed on the document and saw the one detail she had not bothered to hide carefully enough. The date matched a day he had spent in the state capitol, presiding over a public court session with witnesses, records, and cameras all around him.
The moment he saw that, the entire story shifted. The farm was still standing, the title was still in his name, but someone had already tried to turn paper into reality before he ever knew the game had begun. The county records office went quiet as Everett laid the file on the counter. Clerk Lyle Benton turned pale as he opened it, because the transfer package was complete in the worst possible way. It included a deed, a notarized power of attorney, a subdivision map, and development filings for a company called Silver Basin. The parcel numbers matched, the legal descriptions matched. At a glance, it looked clean. That was exactly why it had passed through. But Everett knew where to look. The signature was too perfect. The notary seal belonged to someone no longer in office. The company had been created only days before the supposed sale, and the address tied to the filing led straight back to Nolan Pierce's law firm. Everett asked for the access logs, the filing trail, and the original images, then stood back while the clerk worked through the records with shaking hands. Across town, Marlene was holding an emergency HOA meeting and presenting luxury villas, a golf course, and an artificial lake as if the project were already guaranteed. She spoke as though Everett had simply abandoned the farm and now trying to interfere with progress. By evening, a lawsuit arrived, accusing him of trespassing and trying to stop a legitimate transaction. The date on the forged power of attorney matched the exact day he had been on the bench in the Capitol. That was the detail that broke the case open. No matter how polished the paperwork looked, the timeline could not lie, and the timeline was beginning to expose every person who had touched the file. The courtroom filled quickly, and Marlene arrived expecting a routine eviction. Instead, the side door opened and Everett stepped through in a black judicial robe, calm and composed, taking his seat behind the judge's bench for an administrative moment that made the entire room freeze. He did not preside over his own case, but the shock had already landed. He immediately disclosed the conflict, stepped away from the bench, and let an independent judge take over. Yet the damage to Marlene's confidence was already visible. Once the hearing began, the evidence moved one piece at a time. The forged signature was matched to a prior court document with impossible precision. The notary registration had expired long before the filing date. The development company had been created days before the sale. The records office footage showed who physically submitted the papers. The financial trail revealed that the supposed land deal had been used to hide debt and move money through the HOA and connected firms. Marlene's face kept changing as each layer peeled away, from certainty to irritation, then to panic, and finally to the empty look of someone watching a plan collapse in public. The court froze the sale, restored Red Hollow to Everett, and began the wider investigation that would follow her for months. By the time the hearing ended, the only thing that remained was the truth she had underestimated from the beginning. Some people think a forged deed can take land. Red Hollow proved otherwise. It can bend paperwork, it can fool a clerk, and it can buy time, but it can never rewrite reality. So the real question is simple. How many other property battles start the same way, with someone assuming the records are weaker than the truth?